it was growing lighter. An altogether different conversation was occurring between the joint heads of the reciprocators. It was also getting late. Snape's duty around the school premises was to begin, and here he was still in a meeting with Cleus Lupin. Urgent, yes. Snape would agree, urgent. But enough to hold his interest without the necessities of the functioning school intruding on the telling. And this is where the meeting was left. Snape arose from his desk, moving towards the pictures of his predecessors, their frames empty or displaying "Do Not Disturb" signs in Gothic script. Indeed, we have some very special people who are willing to help give up their time to our cause. Cleus paced towards Snape, who himself was paused in his duty route, checking security and for dormitory absconders. It is a travesty, were we to enact the latest from Strasbourg. From the European Ministry. Indeed, yes. I feel their rationale is misguided. To aim to obliterate the past by focusing on a progressive curriculum would. Yes, yes indeed, snapped Cleus impatiently. Let them ban pensives, it is the combined joint government policy as it is. Let them try to ban old magic, this is my concern, Septimus. How can they even attempt it when every part of every magical being has a connection to it? It's like trying to ban continental drift, fog, sunlight. We as the government have tried to remain as compliant as we can. Our legislation is worded such as it means that which may engender wizardly extremism. Conjurism, qualified Snape, his face impassive in contrast to Cleus's simmering disquiet. Yes indeed, conjurism. Cleus stepped towards Snape, his sculpted features impassive, and Severus knew that the wizard was regaining his composure. What of the children? Your message mentioned the children's illnesses? Indeed. Your opinion of Neville Longbottom may be low. Snape eyed Cleus carefully. The reference to the member of staff, the only member of staff, to which Cleus had issued an enhanced support program upon appointment. However, it was reference to a pair of herbology phenomena that had given me the idea. If we accept that magic is transmitted in a wave format, at such close quarters for a prolonged time, you would agree, I expect, that the students have been substantially exposed. Indeed, nodded Cleus. We know this to be the case. We are to assume the child and will sicken further and die? It was true. This was the prognosis for non-wizards, the consensus, a basic tenet of all magic. Non-wizards become ill in prolonged contact with wizards, hence separate but parallel cultures developing. Not in this case. I asked Poppy Pomfrey to collect information about those ill. All students, all non-wizards, became ill between the 2nd and 3rd weeks of term. Almost all remain in the infirmary. Almost all? 2 of the non-wizards students have returned to their lessons. They appear to have overcome their symptoms. In addition, and I add this with a strict caveat Elias, Snape stepped towards his colleague, they appear to have a measure of magic. Silence. Snape pressed his lips together lest he ruin the moment. Concepts and conclusions were developing in the air between the 2 wizards. Who? John Tallick and Adam Owen. John a first year, Adam a second year. And they have not suffered a relapse? Not that we can tell. Snape shifted between feet, wondering whether he should make his excuses while he continued with his morning duty round. Are we to assume then that those who are still under Madame Pomfrey's care will not make a recovery? We cannot be sure. Many are very ill. Parents, or at least those who have been informed by their children in addition to a notification under school policy, are aware of their conditions. The limiting of the use of pensives has limited communication by many, of course. The students seem to be suffering viruses. There is no pattern to their illnesses. Many suffer from colds and flu. It's as if their immune systems have been damaged in some way and they are unable to recover, not even with non-wizard medication, antibiotics, antivirals. And how does Longbottom fit into this? Pond algae. Pea plants. He has purported from his research into the growth of these plants that if they grow in proximity of magical specimens it changes them, alters their phenotype genetically so that their outward characteristics benefit evolutionary. Prickly air. Tough as steel on the mouths of small mammals, and so on. That sounds like a benefit, mused Callias. It would appear so. Neville Longbottom is nothing if not thorough, and given that he is an expert in species that take time to yield results, this is no bad thing. Silence. It was the least that the young professor deserved, whose genius took time and a little searching was required. Longbottom has documented a drawback to this apparent magical advantage, a factor he has pointed out in his summary to his Buttons counterpart. Snape added pointedly. The lifespan of these plants is significantly accelerated. Normally the sativum would prosper for 8 to 10 weeks, enough time to mature and grow pods, too. And under the influence of magical plants? 8 days. Even if they are removed from a magical environment, reducing the life of the plants to roughly 1/7 of what might be expected. Dalek and Doan? Snape could see Cleus's mind calculating the reduction in lifespan of the young people who were currently, and had been, ill. We are monitoring them closely. They don't appear to have any adverse effects. That is to say, they can't do a lot of magic but enough to be noticeable. Owen managed to levitate a leaf using Jones's wand, for example. We can only know for sure if he had been more successful if he went to a wand maker and had a wand choose him. Would the influence of being at Hedgewood's have enough of an effect for him to have acquired magical ability that could be developed? Or is it a side effect from illness, such as chicken pox scars? I don't intend to find out, Callias. Indeed. You have already expressed your position that the non-wizards, whether ill or not, should leave the school and return home. Your ambition was noble, Callias. It was bold, and daring. Snape's glance shifted to the wizards in the pictures. Several of them were, in the dim dawnlight, preparing themselves for a day in an advisory capacity and had begun their morning ablutions. However, it is immoral to allow the children to remain if they are to have, if the plant results are scalable, 8, 9, 10 years left to live. They should go home. Agreed, Callias nodded. We will begin as soon as practicable. Now, we have other points to discuss and a lot of work to do back at the ministry. Let's make this prompt, Severus. Indeed. Snape exhaled heavily through his nose and took a seat behind his desk. Typical. You wait weeks to speak to him and then he arrives just as you're about to begin the day. There seems to be an undercurrent of conjurist attitude which is penetrating through as we expected. We are as a body of staff, challenging these attitudes and punishing wrongdoers, objectively and in line with school policy. We have addressed each year of students in assemblies to talk to them about such things as the work of wizard and non-wizard collaboration, such as the reciprocators. It is interesting to note that, because the non-wizards have attended mixed schools, wizards on the whole have not, and they are less tolerant, as a result. No other concerns. Reciprocators? Apart from what I have told you. As for ministry work, Tabitha is still beyond. Lily presented her research about all magic at the meeting and the links into British culture. All research points to a divergence of each group. Perhaps as a result of what you describe in the non-magical plants, perhaps naturally. They realize that living within mixed communities significantly reduces their lifespan, hence they settle away from wizards. And then, of course, they had kept each other at arm's length, a good start to mistrust and suspicion which developed. I will feed this back to the ministry and we can inform policy. James? He is well organized. They all are. They are doing all they can. But we have to face facts, Severus. We are short-staffed. We need to contain the problem with non-wizard children in our care, and at the same time counter the threat of conjurism. That is your concern, Callias, said Snape, getting to his feet. You should have enough evidence in. All our problem is, Severus, that we do not know how many conjurists exist in the country. The attacks are sporadic. There are at least two types of conjurists, the more dangerous, organized ones like those who allow their werewolves and vampires into their homes, who allow them to attack Remus and Sirius. And then the troublemakers, out for a laugh and a lark. Indeed, a great undertaking. We have a good deal of evidence the Mysteria Vincento was the culprit behind my office break-in. On the face of it, that is. Nothing taken, and yet. He shot a look at Snape. Do you trust Tabitha in her task, Severus? Implicitly. As do you. You realize that the break-ins were a diversion. You know Vincento is a double agent for the conjurist leaders in Europe. Can the same be said of Cecilia? I would implicitly trust Cecilia, replied Snape. She has shown fortitude and courage. She suffers and yet continues to do so for the cause of good and right. You speak of Septimus, of course. Indeed. It is obvious the deep love and affection she has for the boy and the cruel choice between exile from him and imprisonment, which is of course, another form of exile. She knows she is in a position where she can help. She has hope of seeing her son again while she works at Durmstrang. And Septimus is settled. Like any other Hedgewood student. Works hard, has made friends. Is pushing the rules a little, however his circumstances are unusual, with his father incapacitated and his mother absent. No concerns about. None. A little under the weather was the worst of note. Not enough to confirm our suspicions, because genetically it is unprovable. This last sentence hung in the air between them noticeably. Then Snape spoke once more. It is widely known Cecilia came from behind the veil. Those in the ministry know more than the general public. Lucius Malfoy and I the most, having been there. But, were it not for this uprising, anything that had ever been written by Cecilia Lupin about fantasy worlds where mighty wizards overran a school similar to this would have faded to obscurity. As it is, there is no public consciousness connecting conjurism with the story that never was. Then no more mention of it is needed. Nothing can be gleaned by the public. The conjurists cannot use it in any way. It is and remains a story. That is indeed what you'd think. Callias's voice dropped a little, and he turned his back on the now alert head teachers, each craning to hear what the head of the ministry was about to say to the present incumbent. I need to tell you, Severus, about the information imparted to me. Aberforth Dumbledore. For years he could see the seeds of the uprising that we have today. He hypothesized the effects on the continent as a whole by those who we suspect now to be behind the organization of conjurists. His brother, and Gellert Grindelwald. Indeed, Callias stepped closer, his worn features wearing a cloud of uncharacteristic uncertainty. But more than that. Aberforth believed that they were beginning to collect together intransmutable objects. I understand you are familiar with the term. Naturally I have, replied Snape, overlooking Callias Lupin's patronizing overtones. They are supposed to be connected to other dimensions. Correct, and now we have a physical one who has been causing havoc being in Durmstrang. Oh yes, of course originally I intended Mrs. Lupin to remain at the school to collect information. But since it was the intransmutable objects which were stolen from the office, by Vincento, to whose door those latter wizards are connected, there is more evidence here than can be explained by coincidence. Of this I am convinced, Severus. And therefore security? You want to catch and convict Vincento? Maybe. But I believe he is more valuable to us alive and free from suspicion of detection. Bait. Then his connection to all of this is pivotal, concluded Snape, sitting back down at his desk. A Mysteria like Tabitha, He has more than likely stolen the intransmustable objects from your office, objects which you have reason to believe Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald are accumulating and who we strongly believe are coordinating and inspiring conjurists. Added to that Cecilia Lupin, who is in an unenviable position in Durmstrang, who has come from a different reality and who, ironically, did the best thing she could to protect herself from general suspicion by writing all about it. Callias nodded, shifting a little on his feet. As long as Tabitha is doing what she is required. Where her feeling takes her. A special gift. Always mysterious. And it is the uncertainty of her skill which has you worried, thought Snape, wryly. You can't control or rationalize what she must do, and yet you know that she alone must do it. For it is only Tabitha Benright who can. Both you and I know this, as does she. Tabitha is the least likely person to let us down, Callias. You are right, of course, concluded the head of the ministry, a little too hurriedly. So it is agreed, Snape, he continued, changing the subject. We must look to the here and now and solve what is in front of us. Were it ever so, I will take steps for the non-wizards to leave Hedgewoods, whether or not they are or ever have been ill here. And I will continue to coordinate the Aurors and James, though the reciprocators, to manage the threat. Thank you, Severus. Callias held out a hand, again unlike him. Snape took it, and shook the bond of the joint head of the reciprocators. Now, if you will excuse me. Mrs. Lupin sends vast quantities of detailed information about Durmstrang, and it is very time-consuming picking out facts which are in any way important. Good morning, concluded Severus Snape as Callias left through the now open door and turned his attention to the sound of the castle's inhabitants rising. Perhaps they could manage themselves in a morning after all. Taking a few steps in Callias's wake and meeting a very agitated Dobby and Winky coming the other way, listening to what they had to say as they hopped around before following them purposefully, maybe not.